What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Book Binge on the King Crusoe YouTube channel. This is episode 26 of the series, and this week we are covering 5 fantasy series I want to read next year and 5 more I want to reread. Now, big disclaimer before we get into this list. I am a very slow reader. I'm pretty surprised that I've read something like 20 books already in 2022 by the time I'm recording this video. Because I can't read that many books in a whole year, this list is about series that I plan to start. I may not, well, there's several series here that I'm definitely not going to finish next year. There's a couple that I might, just kind of depends on how things are going and how big they are, how easy they are to read, things like that. But just so you know, this is about series that I plan to start next year, not about series that I plan to read in their entirety next year. Because if I did that, then there might be 5 series that I'm able to put on them, all relatively short, and that'd be the whole video. So I'm not going to do something like that. Also, just so you know, I'm going to order this list just for some variation reasons between a new series I want to read and then a series that I want to reread, and just kind of go back and forth like that, just to have some fun with it. But without further ado, let's begin the list. Now, the first new read that I want to start in 2023, as I've been kind of anticipating for a really long time and trying to find when I'm ready to read it and want to read it, is The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. Now, as I talk about all these series, I'm only going to hold up and show the first book of the series because it's a lot easier, and it's also easier on me in editing to not have to take pictures and put them all up there of the full series. So I'm just going to show the first one of each. This series, The Wheel of Time, has been the single highest priority series that I've been wanting to start ever since I basically got back into reading several months ago. And, even in high school when I was also reading a little bit, mostly junior high school, when I was also reading a lot, The Wheel of Time was a series that I really wanted to read basically the entire time. So this has been a high priority for me for forever. And I've got to admit, over the last month or two, I've actually been debating whether I will actually start the series in 2023 or if I'll push it back further, or early 2023 rather. I don't know if I'll start this book in the first quarter of it or if it might be later in the year when I start. I don't know. The reason for wanting to push it back or debating whether I'm going to push it back, because, well, this year I've read or am reading or will be reading an obscene amount of really big books like War and Peace, which I'm still in the middle of. I have the Count of Monte Cristo in my notes, but I actually don't think I'll be reading that this year anymore because I had a productivity slump in June, so I just didn't get to start that in time, and it became low priority because I wasn't going to force myself to read this big, massive book that I just didn't have time for. There's Les Mis, Dark Tower with books 4, 5, and 7, which are all really big. Just a lot of big books that I'm like, well, do I want to immediately start 2023 with a gigantic series made up of pretty gigantic books? I don't know, but I've been wanting to read this for so long that I might just go ahead and start. If, I might do one every couple months, one every 3 months even. Depends, just what I'm feeling. But I will almost assuredly be starting Wheel of Time at least with this first book in 2023. Now, let's look at reread number 1, being The Underland Chronicles by Suzanne Collins. Now, this is a very small book in comparison to the one that I just held up, and whenever I reread this, because I do plan to do it next year, it's going to be my 3rd time through the series, and it might actually be my 4th. I don't remember for certain, but it'll at least be my 3rd. This is one of my all-time favorite series. At this time, it is still currently my number 1. I know it's YA, and it's really short, but there's something about these books that I just really love. Zoom through, able to read one a day, even though I'm a slow reader. I just spend the time to just plow through them. They're really great books. I was actually originally planning to throw these in as palate cleansers in between volumes of Les Mis in November/December, back when I was planning for it to be a little bit longer, but then I decided to join a read along for Sun Eater, and now I'm actually leading that read along in Discord. So these will probably be palate cleansers for Wheel of Time instead. Brand new read number 2 shall be Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. Now, John Gwynn's been on my radar for a little while, and I look forward to seeing what these books are all about, what the hype is for, because I know very few people who don't like John Gwynn's books. I've heard that these things are really quick and easy despite their somewhat intimidating size. Like they're not short, but thanks to really short chapters and just the way that they're paced, I guess, they go by really quick for most people. So I'm not too worried about adding these into the schedule next year. And it's only 4 books. And like I said, apparently reads quick. So I think I ought to be able to read the whole series next year. I hope to. Reread number 2 is going to be Heroes of Olympus by Rick Riordan. Although there might be a little bit of a caveat to this. Now, similar to the Underland Chronicles, like I said, this will be my 3rd time through the series. I just absolutely love these early series by Rick Riordan. They're just so good. It's very close to my favorite alongside the Underland Chronicles, this being my number 2 series of all time at the moment by a razor thin margin. Like they're pretty much both my number 1 at this point. I recently, in January and March, reread the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series earlier this year, like I said, and am hoping to fit in the King Chronicles reread into my busy TBR this summer. But yeah, I plan to read this next year. Like I said, there would be a caveat, and I am going to explain that now. I have the Red Pyramid here, which is the first book in the King Chronicles series, because this might actually be the Rick Riordan series that I read next year instead. I had a productivity slump in June, things happened, got COVID, wasn't reading or doing anything for a couple weeks, so I fell behind on a lot of stuff. I have no clue if I'll actually be able to fit this trilogy into my schedule this year. I really hope to, and I'm going to really try to, because I've been really itching to read the series and more Rick Riordan in general. Rick Riordan, sorry. So I do want to fit this in this year if I can. If not, I'll read this next year instead. I think I could fit both series in next year, but it really depends on how things go. So I just have them both up here just in case. And now we move on to brand new read number 3, being what's it called? I know what it's called. Ryra Revelations. I think that's how it's pronounced. The Ryra Revelations. It's so hard to say the name, I swear. By Michael J. Sullivan. Now, I've heard little to nothing about the series other than that it's brilliant with brilliant protagonists, pretty much, and with great pacing and structure overall. Now, Mike from Bike's Book Reviews. Good grief. Mike from Mike's Book Reviews said in his Why You Should Read video for Ryra. I'm going to mess that up every single time I say it. Mike said in his Why You Should Read video for the series that it made for perfect reads for him in between Wheel of Time books, or in between Wheel of Time when he took the big break in between the series, for a great change of pace, stuff like that. So I'm actually taking his recommendation and hoping to fit all 6 of these books in between Wheel of Time books as such. So I don't know if I'll read it all next year. I doubt it, but I'm hoping to at least get this first compilation of books 1 and 2 in next year in between a couple of the Wheel of Time books. We'll see how things go. Reread number 3 is going to be The Lorien Legacies by Pittacus Lore. The first half of the series is my 3rd time through the series. The second time will be my 2nd time through them. I was rereading them at some point before I went into my 2 or 3 year long slump where I just didn't read anything because I was too busy gaming, doing other different stuff. But I was halfway through the series when I dropped the reread. And rereading them now, it's well, you could just start where you left off. I mean, I could, and I could reasonably, because for some reason I'm really good at dropping series in the middle and then picking them back up later and being perfectly fine, not needing to reread the first books again. But here's the thing. This first book in the series is easily a top 5 book of all time for me. Absolutely incredible. Every single time I read this book, I read it in a day or two. Just somehow I'm able to just fit it in because I cannot put it down. It's so good. And I do really want to finish rereading the series because there's the sequel trilogy that came out, and then there's all of the novellas and stuff like that. Things that are just well, I want to read some of this other material in the Lorien universe, so I'm going to go ahead and reread the series at some point. So I do plan to start another reread again next year with this first book because I just love it. and I think I honestly should be able to fit it all into 2023. I recently had a coworker and acquaintance read through the whole series. She enjoyed it a lot, and I also had her read, as I mentioned, the sequel trilogy and most of the original novellas as well. And she said that they're worth reading, so that got me really excited to pick the series up again. Now, brand new read number 4 is going to be a series that I definitely do not read all in 2023. Just kind of a thing where it's like, oh, I want something a little bit different. I'll just pick this up. That is Redwall by Brian Jacques. Kind of a more fable oriented fantasy series targeted at, the middle grade, young adult people, but a series that I know plenty of people who've read at least some of these first few books of, particularly when they were younger, and they're like, well, I loved Redwall, and I loved an old movie for Redwall, so I'm just like, pretty low commitment to just pick up one of these books every once in a while and just read it, because I know they kind of fall into a similar structure. There's 22 of them, but I've heard that they just kind of repeat the same thing over and over, just with different characters and different, stuff like that. So it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I want to read a Red Ball book. Oh, I want to read a Red Ball book. I might as well just read one. So it's a low commitment thing that's like, oh, I could probably just fit one of these here because I don't really feel like reading anything else. Let's go ahead and do that. Now, reread number 4 is kind of halfway not a reread, but I am so bad at English right now. Forgive me. This is my 6th video in a row that I've recorded today. But Ranger's Apprentice by John Flanagan is another series that I plan to start again in 2023. The first half of this series is a reread. In fact, I've read the first couple books few times, and I've read the books after that a time or two as well. The second half is completely new to me, though. I've always loved the first 2 books of the series, and even 3 to 5 are pretty great once I get over a hurdle in book 3 for some reason I always struggled with when I was younger. And I want to say I've read book 6 before, but I genuinely don't remember if I have or not. But either way, first half of the series, really good. I've always loved it. And I've always wanted to go back through these books and at least finish this original series. I love the kind of amalgamation that they have of medieval low fantasy that kind of glides easily into more Tolkien-esque, higher fantasy in parts. It just worked really well for me as a teenager, and Will and Halt as characters have always also been favorites of mine. So I may be able to do part of the series in 2023. It'll certainly go into 2024, and who knows if I'll even be able to start it next year. Like I said, this is reread number 4. It's kind of lower on the priority list, but it is there. Brand new read number 5 is The Dragon Riders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey. Now, I talked about this a little bit when I did the book haul with this series in it, and this book has all 3 books in it, so it's rather chonky. I think I'm actually more likely to read these books in 2023 than Redwall, partially because it's just a trilogy and because I'm really interested in them in a way. So I don't know why I have them ordered the way I do, but that's kind of whatever. What can I really say though? Like, as far as I've been made aware, this is kind of the quintessential dragon focused fantasy type of stuff is Anne McCaffrey's work. So I think so far I've only really committed myself to this original trilogy in Harper Hall. This is the only one that I'm committing myself to for next year, so I think they'll be relatively easy to fit into my schedule next year. Similar to the last thing, this is kind of sort of not a reread, but we'll talk about that. Reread number 5 is Levin Thumps by Obert Sky. Like I said, similar to Ranger's Apprentice, the first half of this is a reread. I've read the first 2 books, and I stopped in the middle of the 3rd book because when I was younger, I had this problem where if I read too much of a single world all at one time, I just stopped reading because I got really bored. But then I could pick it up years later and just be fine. But that's been since like 7th or 8th grade, so it's been like 7 or 8 years since I read these first couple books. And even though I still remember, not necessarily a whole lot, but I remember several key things about those 2 books, I want to start from the beginning again if I decide to actually read them, because starting in the middle of book 3 when it's been like 8 years since I started, or since I read the first 2, just it seems kind of weird to me. So yeah, I do want to get to these, but I think this might be like probably the lowest priority of all of the series on this list, I think, but it is one that I do have my eye on still and will for quite a while until I actually read through and finish the series. Even today, though, since I have read the first two books and have a little bit to say, I can't really compare these to really anything else that I've ever read. They're kind of like Dark Tower in that sense, but Dark Tower and Love and Thumbs are nowhere near similar, but they're similar in the sense that they're not like any other series that really exists. I do remember enjoying the first two books quite a bit for what they were, especially considering how weird they are, but I've always regretted not finishing them for some reason because I've always wanted to see what other crazy stuff would come up. So, alongside some other stuff in this list, I don't see myself getting to these in 2023. If I do, it might just be like one book at near the end of the year. I don't know. If I can, that's awesome. Otherwise, they'll remain on the table for future years, probably 2024 or something like that. But wait, even though I've gone through all five series I want to read and reread, I do have a quick honorable mention to put here just because I feel like it deserves to be on the list. And that is Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. This is one I've needed to get to as soon as possible for forever, but strangely enough, I don't know why I still find it lower priority than most other things on this list. Um, this combined with the fact that I couldn't really call it a new read or a reread is just kind of leaves it as an honorable mention. I read the first book, I read a tiny bit of the second book before dropping that way, like back in sixth grade or something like that. So I can't really call it a reread because I haven't read enough of it to justify saying a reread, but I also can't really call it a new read because I've read enough of it to not justify that either, but I digress. I've always felt like I've been missing out on this series, and regardless of the whole revisionist history type of thing, I know the impact that they made, so I've always wanted to go through and actually finish the series. And isn't this art just fantastic? I hope that whenever I do get around to some of these, that some of you will join along, even if it's for a reread or something like that, so I can kind of share that magic with other people, since I know that's a lot of what made the series so good. But yeah, that is the list. Five fantasy series I want to start, five more that I want to reread, and an honorable mention. At the very least, I can be happy that I actually remained a little bit more consistent with the amount of items in the title versus how many appeared in the video, unlike another list video I did earlier this year, which in retrospect is not a very good video, but you know, that's kind of how all things go when you start doing stuff. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If you've read and loved some of these series in the list, let me know what you think about them and what you're most excited for me to get to. Maybe I'll change some of the priority of some of these series I want to get to based on what you guys have for feedback, you know? Depending on the reaction, I may shift some things. I obviously don't expect to get to all of these in 2023. Plans may change, some other things may come up that I'm more interested in, kind of depending on how things go. And I don't think I'll be able to start all of them. Definitely won't be able to finish all of them. In fact, several of them I know I won't finish. But even moving into 2024, beyond 2023, and with like the Wheel of Time and something like that, probably even further along than that, these are the series I'm currently most excited to get into in the future. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and check out seasonalproductions.com for all of my other video and writing content all in one place, including the in-progress rough draft for my first fantasy novel, Silent Rain, which actually hasn't seen that much writing in quite a while. Whoops. But that'll be all for this week. I'll see you guys all next week with whatever the Book Binge episode is then. So I'll see you guys with whatever it is.